Welcome to PVZ Sequence Explained. So I'm just going to say sorry up front because I don't have a lot of time doing video editing or getting a better mic, so it might be a little bit rough, but let's just get started. So we have two very important concepts inside sequence. The first one is symbol, and the second one is rhythm. So let's first talk about symbol. So a symbol is a representation of an operation inside the game. So an operation is anything you can do with the game. So that includes punting a card or using a cog. So we can see here the first symbol being the capital P. So that comes from Pao, which is the Chinese pronunciation of cob. And that's actually the only case where the Chinese pronunciation is used. For all the others, it's just the English names. For the second one, we have A for ash. So we have a capital A for cherry bomb. We have a prime for jalapeno, and we have a small a for squash. And then we have N for nuclear or doomshroom. So because they really looks like an A bomb, I guess. And then we have an ice for ice room or ice. So that's pretty straightforward. And lastly, we have C for cannon fodder. So that refers to a set of cheap plants that respawn really quickly that you can use to stalk your gargantures, because the garganture is just going to keep hammering those and you don't have to pay a lot for doing that. So that includes the four most common cannon fodders here. So that's puffshrooms, sunshrooms, scaredy shrooms, and flower pots. And lastly, we have a separate set that is called implicit operation, which is shorthanded as IO. So IO refers to anything that can fire automatically. So on the left side, we have a pea shooter, we have a gloom, we have a winter melon, so they can kill zombies on their own. We don't have to do anything. That's why it's also called implicit operation, because the operation is there. It does damage to the zombies, but it's implicit. You don't have to do it. It's not explicit, so you don't have to write it in your sequence. So what is rhythm anyways? We know what's a symbol, and we know a symbol describes an operation. And when those operations are arranged in a meaningful way, they form a rhythm. So that's where the rhythm comes from. So it's a music analogy. So let's look at music sheet. If you look at the music sheet and you have the individual notes, so you can think of those as single operations, and you have those operations arranged in a meaningful way. If you have the notes arranged in a meaningful way, then you're going to get a melody, right? So just similarly, if you get the single operations arranged in a meaningful way, then you're going to get a rhythm. So rhythm is a generic strategy of describing how to defeat the game or how to run a setup. So we're going to talk about the first category of rhythm being the card rhythm, or denoted as CX, C coming from card. So we do have a precise and scientific definition of it. So it's the rhythm of around 50 seconds length used in countless setups. So why 50 seconds? Because that's the cooldown period for ice and doom shrooms, and also cherry bombs, and just a lot of like really important cards. So that's why we're using that here. And we can see if we're a very famous example of the FE or fog endless yin yang cobless, or also known as Liang Yi cobless. So the name yin yang probably came from on the left side, the two gloom shrooms just looking at you, kind of weird. I don't know. So probably where that came from. But it's a very famous minimalist cobless setup. And the rhythm is also pretty simple. We have C2 down there, and also we have a sequence of IN and then IAA. So I recap is standing for ice shroom, right? And N is for nuclear, which is doom shroom. And we have two A's. The first A is cherry bomb, and the second A prime is jalapeno. So just to be quite clear here, the C2 or card 2 is the name of the rhythm, and everything underlined here is the sequence. So sequence is the details of things that you're going to do inside the game. And the rhythm is just like a generic thing. So if you only have C2, then you only know it's a C category thing, and you're going to handle 2 waves of zombies. So 2 is the parameter here, and you're going to handle 2 waves of zombies inside each loop. So that's all. You don't know what you're going to actually do inside each loop. You have to detail it using the sequence. So a single rhythm can be mapped to multiple sequences. We're going to have another example of quartz clock cobless. So it's very famous for being the first ever stable cobless to beat the survival endless and actually beat the game. So we have 2 tempos. So a tempo means that how fast the game is going to respawn zombies. So if you have a slow tempo, it means that we're going to have a lot of gargantures that are just going to slow things down a lot. That's why we can have a C3 rhythm. So we're going to have I and then I again, and then 2 ashes. So they're just to kill the jacks. We also have an IO suffix here, meaning that it's emphasizing the role of the implicit operations, which is gloom, fume, and winter melon here. It's more of like a courtesy. It's not required. It's not necessary. It's just like a mark. And then if we have an ultra fast tempo, right? So if you don't have any of the gargantures, we don't have ball zombies, we don't have zombies, we don't have any of those that are like slowing things down, then we can get really fast with this high number of I/O. So we can actually get as fast as C7 or C8 I/O in this case. So the second one we're going to talk about is the Cobb rhythms, or PX. So definition is rhythms of around 36 seconds, length containing only additive waves. So what is additive waves? We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, let's think about like, where did that PX came from? Well, it's actually very simple. It's a Chinese character, right? It's Paul. Okay, yeah, of course. If you don't use that, then you're going to have the same acronym for Cobb and card, right? So using P instead of C here is actually kind of a good call. So we're going to look at a very famous example. So this is arguably the most famous setup ever. So it's the classic 8-Cobb setup. And the rhythm is pretty simple. It's P4, it's 4 partitions of PP, and each wave is going to be 9 seconds. So why is it 9 seconds? So if you have 9 seconds and you time it by 4, you have 4 times 9, which is 36, which makes sense because 36 is the cooldown period of Cobbs. It's actually a little bit shorter than that. It's actually 34.75 seconds, but we usually just use 36 for simplicity. And here we have another example of laddered gloom 12 Cobb. So that's actually the first ever 12 Cobb. It's from 2009. It's really Asian, very impressive. The more popular version is those without the gloom shroom because they're just not necessary, but this is the version in the history. And it's using P6. So we have 6 repetitions of PP and each wave is gonna last for 6 seconds. So here I wanna say about one more thing. So if you look at the family tree of P rhythms or of Cobb rhythms, you have from the slowest one, which is P2, it's too slow, doesn't really make sense, it's barely used, to the fastest one, which is P6. And we also have a game setting that each wave has to last at least 6 seconds. So you cannot go under that. So if you look at P6, right, that is actually the fastest as we can get. So you cannot technically get faster than P6. This is why we also call the P6 as the natural upper limit. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what is additive, right? Remember the long definition of the Cobb rhythm contains saying something like you have to only use additive waves, but what is an additive waves anyway? So before that, we're going to talk about refreshing. So refreshing means spawning of the next wave of zombies. So how does the game determine when to refresh and how to refresh? Well, there's only one. It's very simple. There's only one rule, which is if the health of the current wave zombies goes under a threshold, then it's going to refresh. So we actually have a number for that threshold. It's 50% to 65% of total health of the current wave of zombies. So if you kill enough zombies of the current wave, then the game is going to say, okay, I'm going to refresh more zombies. Why not? Just for fun. So here are some of the badasses that we call addition. Why are they called addition? Because they kill a lot of zombies, right? And because how the refreshing mechanism works, if you kill a lot of zombies, then the next wave of zombies are going to spawn faster. So that's why they are known as additions. And there's also a very magical plant that does the opposite thing, which is the ice shroom. Because and especially the early ice. So if you do an early ice, so if you ice the zombies as soon as they spawn and you freeze them outside the screen or outside the lawn, then it's going to have a really outstanding effect in not letting the zombie take damage, right? Because they're just freezing outside and they're not going to take any damage. They're going to move really slowly to you. So this is why Ice Shroom can make the next wave of zombies spawn more slowly. So this is why it's very chilling. It's known as subtraction. So a subtractive wave is a wave that uses early ice, and an additive wave is just any other wave that doesn't use that. So after talking about additive and subtractive, we also want to talk about what is a constant versus varying. So a varying rhythm, the whole definition is kind of like complicated. I don't want to touch on that really right now. But you can think of varying rhythm as a rhythm that has uneven wavelength or uses early ice. So as we can see, by using ice properly, you can prolong some of the waves, thus creating a varying rhythm. But is ice necessary in varying rhythm? Well, the answer is yes and no. No being that we can actually have a Cobb-based varying rhythm. It's also known as PXU. The U is coming from uneven wavelength. So here we have a P classic 10 Cobb build, the P5U. So usually we can just do P5, which is 5 repetition PP, and each wave is going to last 7 seconds. That's perfectly fine. But we can also do P5U, right? So in the case of P5U, would have a really funky wavelength. So you can see it's 69696, almost like a dirty joke. But if you add those up, we have 3 6s and have 2 9s. They actually add up to 36. So this works, but it's also known as not necessary. because you can just do P5. And there are some rare cases where PXU is required, is necessary, but it's beyond our scope and we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to know that it's really not common. So the common one of varying rhythm is going to be ice-based. But now let's talk about the third category, which is the single ice varying rhythm. It's also known as SX, S coming from single. The definition being rhythms of around 36 seconds length containing exactly one subtractive wave. The example here is DE, rare 4 cob. A recommended way of doing this is using S3. So you can see there we have IPP and then PP. So IPP is the subtractive wave and the PP is the addition wave. And it's the wavelength of 21 and 15. The reason why we are using 15 there is because it's a rare setup. You cannot hit your cob at code 8. You have to do at code 7. Meaning that you have to let the zombies approach you and give them some time. So this is where the 15-second wave really shines. And also as a courtesy, just write subtractive wave first, just to be polite. It's not required, but yeah. But you might be thinking, wait, why is that S3, not S2, right? Because we only handled 2-wave zombies here, and it seems like it should be S2. Well, the reason is counting parameters in varying rhythms is different. There's only one rule, +1 for additive and +2 for subtractive. But why the shenanigan? Well, there are 2 reasons. The reason 1 is convention. The reason 2 is ice is just too strong, especially early ice, and it needs to be counted because it almost has a similar effect of launching a pair of cops. So in really rough terms, P3 is really comparable to S3, P4 is comparable to S4, and P5 is comparable to S5. Well, it's in really rough terms, but it also helps you understand like the relation between P and S. So it's a useful convention. Let's just stick to it. So let's talk about the next category, which is the daytime double ice varying rhythm. It's also known as CHX. So the long definition is the rhythms of around 36 seconds length or slightly longer, containing multiple subtractive waves that do not involve reuse of cobs. So here we're not going to talk about reuse of cobs, it's another topic, but you can see the key point here is it contains multiple subtractive waves. But you might be thinking, wait, where does the CH came from? Well, it came from change, which refers to varying rhythm, because change is a synonym for vary. The change X rhythms were the first varying rhythms to be discovered back in 2010 and 11. So it was really ancient. So people use an overly generic name, which is change, and it kind of just stuck. But actually, if you're just going for it, because we're using S for single, and if you use D for this, because we are distinguishing between daytime double ice and nighttime double ice, we actually, like just using D is not enough. You might have to use DD. In that case, like CH is not that bad, right? If you think about it. So for DE garden stick cob, we are using change 4. It's really simple. The small d is D coming from delay. So it's a delayed cob that's going to kill the ink. So at the rear part of this, so it's going to land at the code 3 or code 4, right there in the middle lane. It's for killing imps. But except that, the change 4 is pretty straightforward. It's 18-18, so you have a 36 total. Makes perfect sense. And then inside sideless 8 cob, we are using change 5. So as you can also see there, we have 15, 15, and then 6. And also like I-PPd, the first P is for, it's called the transition cob. It's for killing the digger zombie and the zombani zombies because they're not affected by the ice and they have to be taken care of, especially. But other than that, the wavelength is pretty straightforward. You have to, it's actually like it's actually pretty much like the only way you can have a change 5, right? And also why we're having 6 there is because having a 6 is like the minimal wavelength. And it's like really useful than all the other wavelengths. And lastly, we have change 6, which is used in double ice 16 cob. It's also like the first time it's ever used. So the wavelength is 12.6, 12.6. It also makes perfect sense because it adds up to 36. We just really like that number. And also, as I mentioned before, the D is for delayed. The large D is for delayed cob that are firing in front. So that means that you're going to hit them at code 9. We don't really care about the imp in this case, but yeah, you get the idea. And lastly, we actually have another thing. It's called C6I. It's not CH, but it's an addition to that. So we have 3 subtractive waves. So it's like 12, 12, 12. So because we have 3 subtractive, and just because how we count the parameter, it's 2, 2, 2. So we end up with 6. but we kind of already used the change 6 for 6, right? So we kind of need another name. That's where C6I kicks in. So I is actually for the extra i's that we're using, because in change 4 to change 6, we're only using 2 i's per loop, but here we're using 3. So the I is for the extra i's, and C was originally for card, but like a lot of things happened and this name just kind of stuck. So you don't have to really understand why is it called C6I. It's like a convention. That was a lot. To sum things up, we have change 4, change 5, change 6, and C6I. So, but if you look at the wavelengths, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much the only way you can go about those. Yeah. Was that it? Well, not really, because we also have an uneven daytime double ice varying rhythm, which is also known as change X U. So the U is taken from uneven wavelength. The first example here is going to be really complicated. It's RE19 Cobb. So we can see that the rhythm name is change 5U, and the wavelength is 16, 14, and 6. And the sequence is a little bit too complicated that I'm not really going to talk about, but I do want you to focus on the B in the first wave. So B is the separate Cobb. So what does that do? So that kills the Jack zombie, the ladder zombie, and the football zombie. So these are like known as fast zombies because they run really fast and eat your Cobb. But the B Cobb or the separation Cobb does not touch the current waves gigagargantuous. So what that means is that you're not going to trigger the game to refresh, but you're killing the fast zombie so that you can have a longer wavelength and protecting your Cobb. So that's where the 16 came from. If you don't have that, like the second wave, you're only going to have 14. So like separation sounds like a good idea, except that it comes at a price. You have to have a Cobb, right? So you have to have that extra Cobb. And that's where the beauty of change 5U kicks in, because if you have change 5U, you can just have 16, 14, and 6. That already adds up to 36. So guess what? You don't have to have 2 separation waves. You can only have 1 separation wave and 1 normal wave, and that just works perfectly. So this is why change 5U is very useful in this case. Secondly, we have another variation, which is the extended day double ice varying rhythm, which is known as change X star. So the star is for extension. So basically, we can, if you look at this, it's like change 4, right? Change 4 star, but it's just like the wavelength is a bit longer. Instead of 18, it's using 21. You might be asking, like, why is it using 21, and why is it called C28 Cobb anyways? So when this setup first came out, this change 4 star was originally known as C2F. I'm not going to touch on why it's called C2F. It's a really terrible name, very horrible. We don't use that anymore. But the name still got stuck with the name of the setup. So the setup is known as C28P or C28 Cobb equivalently. But if you look at the idea of that, it's just because this setup does not really need to use the 18 seconds. Like 21 seconds just works fine. So like, why not? We have 3 extra seconds. We can have more ice storage. We can have more sun. We can just, have more ease. So this is where this is basically the idea of extended rhythms. So this video has covered first, what is symbol, what is rhythm, and the connection between symbol and rhythms. And second, we talk about 4 categories of rhythms. We talk about card rhythms, Cobb rhythms, single ice varying rhythms, and daytime double ice varying rhythms. And there are also 2 other categories that we didn't talk about, which is the nighttime double ice varying rhythm, and the really funky, peculiar one is known as the I rhythm. They are like really complicated. I might do that in a separate video. So but this is it for this video. Please let me know if you liked it. If I have more time, I might be making episode 2, but I don't know. So this is episode 1 of PVZ sequence explained. Thank you for watching.